They called it the Superfortress, and for good reason. The B-29 was the most advanced aircraft on Earth when it first flew in 1942. Pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, a range of 3,250 miles, a bomb load of 20,000 pounds. It could fly higher, faster, and farther than anything else in the sky. It cost $3 billion to develop and build, more than the Manhattan Project that created the atomic bomb. It was a technological marvel, a glimpse into the future of aviation. It was also a widowmaker that killed more American airmen in accidents than the Japanese shot down in combat. The B-29 burned crews alive on runways, exploded mid-air without warning, and crashed so frequently that airmen called it the flying coffin before it ever dropped a bomb on Japan. This is the story of how America's wonder weapon became one of the most dangerous aircraft ever built, and how the young men who flew it paid the price for pushing technology beyond its limits. The B-29 was born from ambition and fear. In 1939, as Hitler's blitzkrieg tore through Poland and war consumed Europe, American military planners looked at the world map and realized they had a problem. If the United States got dragged into a global war, how would they strike enemies thousands of miles away? The B-17 Flying Fortress, America's current heavy bomber, had a range of about 2,000 miles. That was fine for bombing runs across Europe from English bases. But it was useless for attacking Japan from anywhere except bases right on its doorstep. And if Japan captured those bases, America would have no way to hit the Japanese home islands. The military needed a super bomber, an aircraft that could fly from Hawaii or Australia, bomb Tokyo, and return safely. It was an audacious requirement. Most aviation experts said it was impossible. The Army Air Corps did not care about impossible. In January 1940, they issued a specification for a hemisphere defense weapon. The requirements were staggering. Range of 5,333 miles. Speed of 400 miles per hour. Service ceiling of 35,000 feet. Defensive armament sufficient to fight off enemy fighters. And it had to carry a bigger bomb load than the B-17. 4 aircraft companies submitted proposals: Boeing, Lockheed, Douglas, and Consolidated. Boeing's design, the Model 345, won the contract in September 1940. The designation was B-29. The development program was given the highest priority classification. Money was unlimited. Failure was not an option. Boeing engineer Edward Curtis Wells led the design team. They started with a blank sheet of paper and threw out everything they knew about conventional bombers. The B-29 would be huge, with a wingspan of 141 feet and a length of 99 feet. 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines, the most powerful radial engines ever built, would provide 2,200 horsepower each. To achieve the required range, the B-29 needed to fly at high altitude where air resistance was lower. But at 30,000 feet, the temperature drops to 40 degrees below zero and the air is too thin to breathe. So Wells made the B-29 pressurized, the first mass-produced pressurized aircraft in history. The crew could operate without oxygen masks or heavy flight suits. Revolutionary. The defensive armament was equally innovative. Instead of manually operated gun positions where gunners froze in the slipstream, the B-29 used remote-controlled turrets. 4 turrets mounting 2 50-caliber machine guns each, plus a tail position with 2 more guns and a 20mm cannon. Gunners sat inside the pressurized cabin, aiming through computerized sights. The fire control system could link multiple turrets together, concentrating fire on a single target. On paper, it was brilliant. In practice, it was a maintenance nightmare that broke constantly. The first B-29 prototype rolled out in September 1942. It was beautiful, sleek, and silver, looking more like a passenger airliner than a bomber. Test pilot Edmund Allen took it up for its maiden flight. Everything seemed fine. But the B-29 had a fatal flaw that nobody understood yet. The Wright R-3350 engines were powerful, but they were also temperamental, prone to overheating, prone to catching fire, and prone to catastrophic failure. Boeing was so desperate to meet production deadlines that they were installing engines that had not been adequately tested. On February 18, 1943, the second XB-29 prototype took off from Boeing Field in Seattle with a crew of 11, including Edmund Allen. 20 minutes later, the number 1 engine caught fire. Allen tried to return to the field. The fire spread. Flames burned through the wing. The B-29 plunged into a meat packing plant, killing everyone on board and 20 workers on the ground. It was the first B-29 disaster. It would not be the last. The crash should have halted the program. It did not. Pearl Harbor had been bombed. America was at war with Japan. The military needed the B-29 operational as soon as possible. So Boeing kept building them, kept testing them, and kept trying to fix the engine problems while simultaneously ramping up mass production. It was insane. Normally, you finish development, work out the bugs, then start production. With the B-29, development and production happened simultaneously. They were literally modifying the design while factories were building the aircraft. Changes made on the assembly line in Wichita were different from changes in Renton. B-29 aircraft coming off the production line were not standardized. Maintenance crews went crazy trying to keep them flying. The engine problems persisted. The Wright R-3350 engines ran hot under normal conditions. Under combat conditions, with the throttles pushed forward for maximum power, climbing to altitude with a full bomb load, the engines overheated constantly. Cylinder heads cracked, valves seized, exhaust stacks glowed red hot. And then they caught fire. Magnesium engine components burned with intense heat that could not be extinguished. Pilots would see flames licking back from the engine cowling, know they had maybe 2 minutes before the wing burned through, and have to decide whether to bail out immediately or try to land. Many chose wrong. Many burned to death strapped in their seats because they waited too long. By late 1943, B-29 bombers were rolling off assembly lines in Wichita, Renton, Marietta, and Omaha. Thousands were built by workers who had never built an aircraft before, using blueprints that changed weekly, and installing engines that were still experimental. The B-29 production program employed over 100,000 people and cost $3 billion, more money than the United States had spent on any single weapons program in history. And nobody knew if the damn thing would actually work in combat. The test flights were terrifying. B-29 bombers crashed on takeoff. They crashed on landing. They lost engines in flight. They caught fire randomly. Experienced test pilots refused to fly them. The accident rate was so high that the Army Air Forces started assigning B-29 aircraft to operational units before the testing phase was complete, just so they could claim progress. The 58th Bombardment Wing got the first B-29 bombers in late 1943. They were based in Kansas, training for deployment to the Pacific. The training period was a bloodbath. B-29 training flights crashed constantly. On one particularly bad day, 4 B-29 bombers crashed within hours of each other, killing multiple crews. The crashes were not from pilot error. They were mechanical failures, engine fires, structural failures, and system malfunctions. The aircraft was not ready. Everybody knew it. But the strategic bombing campaign against Japan was scheduled to begin, and the B-29 was the only aircraft that could reach Japan from safe bases. So they deployed anyway. In April 1944, the 58th Bombardment Wing flew to India, then staged forward to bases in China. The plan was to bomb Japan from Chinese airfields, refuel in China, and then return to India. It was a logistical nightmare. Everything had to be flown over the Himalayas, the most dangerous air route in the world. B-29 bombers flying the hump crashed regularly, slamming into mountains and disappearing without a trace. The ones that made it to China started flying combat missions in June 1944. The first raid on Japan itself happened on June 15, 1944, when 68 B-29 bombers attacked the steelworks at Yawata. It was a propaganda victory. American bombers had struck the Japanese homeland, but operationally, it was a disaster. The B-29 bombers flying from China could barely reach Japan, bomb anything meaningful, and return safely. The logistics were impossible. For every gallon of fuel a B-29 used to bomb Japan, 6 gallons had to be flown over the hump just to supply the forward bases. It was unsustainable, and the losses were brutal, not from Japanese fighters, but from engine failures. B-29 bombers would lose one engine on the way to the target, another over the target, and try to limp home on 2 engines. Many did not make it. They crashed in the mountains, ditched in the ocean, or made emergency landings in Japanese-held territory where the crews were captured and executed. The solution was the Marianas. In the summer of 1944, American forces captured Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These islands were only 1,500 miles from Tokyo, well within B-29 range. Engineers bulldozed massive airfields, each one large enough to handle hundreds of B-29 bombers. By November 1944, the 21st Bomber Command was operational in the Marianas, under the command of General Curtis LeMay. LeMay was a cold, calculating officer who cared about results, not casualties. He looked at the B-29 program and realized it was failing. The high-altitude precision bombing doctrine was not working. B-29 bombers flew at 30,000 feet, dropped their bombs, and missed the targets because of jet stream winds nobody knew existed at that altitude. The bombs scattered across miles of Japanese countryside. Industrial targets remained intact. LeMay made a radical decision. He stripped out the defensive guns to save weight, and he loaded the B-29 bombers with incendiary bombs instead of high explosives. Fly at night at low altitude, below 10,000 feet, where accuracy was better and Japanese defenses were weaker. Turn the B-29 from a precision bomber into an incendiary weapon designed to burn Japanese cities to the ground. His staff thought he was insane. B-29 crews thought he was sending them on suicide missions. But LeMay did not care. He ordered the first low-altitude incendiary raid for the night of March 9, 1945. The target was Tokyo. That night, 334 B-29s loaded with napalm and incendiary clusters took off from the Marianas. They flew in low over Tokyo and dropped their bombs into a 15-square-mile area packed with wooden buildings. The result was the deadliest air raid in history. The incendiaries created a firestorm, a self-sustaining inferno with winds over 100 miles per hour that sucked oxygen out of the air and burned at temperatures hot enough to melt steel. 16 square miles of Tokyo burned. Between 80,000 and 100,000 people died in one night, more than died at Hiroshima or Nagasaki. B-29 crews could smell burning flesh at 5,000 feet. The updrafts from the firestorm threw bombers around like toys. Some crews vomited from the stench and horror, but they kept bombing. Over the next 5 months, LeMay's B-29 systematically burned every major Japanese city: Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama, Kawasaki, and dozens of smaller cities. The incendiary campaign killed between 300,000 and 500,000 Japanese civilians and left millions homeless. It destroyed Japan's war production capacity. It broke Japanese morale. It was strategic bombing at its most brutal and effective. The B-29 had finally found its role, not as a precision weapon, but as an instrument of mass destruction. And the young men flying those missions had to live with what they had done. But the engine problems never went away. Even during the incendiary campaign, B-29s were crashing and burning. The Wright R-3350 engines failed constantly. Some B-29s lost 2 engines on a single mission and had to ditch in the ocean. Air-sea rescue saved many crews, but not all. Some bombers exploded in mid-air from fuel vapor ignition. Some caught fire on the runway during takeoff and burned before the crew could escape. The B-29 killed its own crews with ruthless efficiency. By the end of the war, the United States had lost 414 B-29 aircraft in combat. They lost 147 more to accidents and mechanical failures outside of combat. That is 561 bombers destroyed, each carrying 11 men. Do the math. That is over 6,000 American airmen dead, and many of them died not from enemy action, but from the aircraft itself. Then came August 6, 1945. A single B-29 named Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another B-29 named Bockscar dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Japan surrendered 6 days after that. The B-29 had ended World War II. It became the most famous bomber in history, the aircraft that delivered the ultimate weapon and the symbol of American technological supremacy. But that narrative erases the human cost of getting to that moment. The Manhattan Project gets credit for building the atomic bomb, but the B-29 program cost more money and killed more Americans during development than the bomb itself. The $3 billion spent on B-29 development and production was the largest single military expenditure of the war. The number of airmen killed in B-29 accidents during training and operations exceeded the number killed by enemy action. The aircraft that ended the war was also one of the most dangerous weapons ever deployed by the United States military. That paradox defines the B-29. After the war, the B-29 remained in service. It flew combat missions in Korea from 1950 to 1953, bombing North Korean and Chinese targets. By then, the aircraft was obsolete, vulnerable to jet fighters and modern anti-aircraft weapons. The Soviet Union even copied the B-29, reverse engineering 3 B-29s that had made emergency landings in Soviet territory during the war. They called it the Tupolev Tu-4. It was a bolt-for-bolt copy, down to manufacturing flaws in the original B-29 design. The Soviets loved it, but even they recognized its limitations. By the mid-1950s, the B-29 was retired, replaced by the B-47 Stratojet and later the B-52 Superfortress, both jet-powered and far more capable. Most B-29s ended up in scrapyards, cut apart for aluminum. A few survive in museums. The Enola Gay sits in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, restored and displayed as a historic artifact. The placard does not mention the engine fires. It does not talk about the training crashes. It does not explain that the B-29 program killed over 1,000 American airmen in accidents. It just celebrates the aircraft that dropped the atomic bomb and ended the war. That is the sanitized version of history. The version that museums and textbooks present is not wrong, but it is incomplete. The real story of the B-29 is darker and more complex. It is a story about pushing technology beyond safe limits because winning the war required it. It is a story about young men who climbed into bombers they knew were dangerous because their country asked them to. It is a story about the human cost of innovation. The price paid when development timelines are compressed and testing is sacrificed for speed. The B-29 worked. It did its job. It helped win the war. But it also killed the people who built it, tested it, and flew it. Both things are true. The engineers who designed the B-29 were brilliant. They created an aircraft that was a generation ahead of its time. Pressurized cabin, remote gun turrets, computerized fire control, and aerodynamic efficiency that would influence airliner design for decades. The B-29 was a masterpiece of engineering, but masterpieces built under wartime pressure often have fatal flaws. The Wright R3350 engine was inadequately tested. The structural analysis was rushed. The fire suppression systems were insufficient. Boeing knew these problems existed. The Army Air Forces knew. They deployed the aircraft anyway, because the alternative was losing the war. That is the calculus of war. Acceptable losses, calculated risks, young men dying so that objectives can be achieved. B-29 crews understood this, even if they did not always articulate it. They knew the engines might fail. They knew the aircraft might explode. They flew anyway. Some did it out of patriotism, some did it because orders are orders, some did it because their friends were doing it and they did not want to be cowards. The reasons varied, but the result was the same. They climbed into those bombers and took their chances. The firebombing campaign remains controversial. Was it necessary? Did burning Japanese cities save American lives by hastening surrender? Or was it a war crime disguised as military necessity? Historians still debate this. The B-29 crews themselves had mixed feelings. Some believed that they were doing what had to be done to end the war. Others were haunted by what they had done. Curtis LeMay, who ordered the campaign, later said that if America had lost the war, he would have been tried for war crimes. He was probably right. But America won, so LeMay became a hero, and the firebombing campaign became a controversial but accepted part of the war effort. The atomic bombings are even more contentious. Were they necessary to force Japanese surrender? Or would Japan have surrendered anyway because of Soviet entry into the war and the naval blockade? This question will never be definitively answered. But what is certain is that the B-29 crews who flew those missions did not make the decision to use atomic weapons. They followed orders. Paul Tibbets, the pilot of the Enola Gay, never expressed regret for dropping the bomb. He believed it saved lives by ending the war. Others on those missions struggled with the moral weight of their actions. The B-29 put them in an impossible position, carrying weapons that killed hundreds of thousands of people in an instant. The legacy of the B-29 Superfortress is triumph and tragedy woven together. It was the wonder weapon that ended World War II. It was the widowmaker that killed its own crews. It was the most advanced aircraft of its era and a flying death trap. It represented the peak of American industrial might and the ruthless calculus of total war. All of these contradictions are true simultaneously. That is what makes the B-29 story so compelling and so dark. Today, when people see a B-29 in a museum, they see a symbol of victory. They see the aircraft that dropped the atomic bomb. They see American technological supremacy. What they do not see are the training crashes in Kansas. They do not see the engine fires over Tokyo. They do not see the crews burning alive because the Wright R3350 failed again. They do not see the 1,000 dead airmen who never made it to combat because the aircraft killed them first. That history is uncomfortable. It complicates the narrative of heroic technology winning the war. But it is the truth. The B-29 Superfortress helped win World War II. That is undeniable. It delivered the atomic bombs that ended the war. It burned Japanese cities and broke Japanese morale. It pushed the boundaries of aviation technology and paved the way for modern bombers and airliners. But it also killed over 1,000 American airmen in accidents. It burned crews alive in training. It crashed so often during development that pilots called it the flying coffin. It was deployed before it was ready because the war demanded it. And young men paid with their lives for that decision. This is the tragic fall of the B-29 Superfortress. Not a fall from glory in combat, but a fall from the pedestal of wonder weapon to the reality of dangerous, unfinished technology pushed into service by the desperation of war. The B-29 did not fail its mission. It succeeded. But that success came at a terrible cost that history often forgets. The boys who died in engine fires and training crashes are footnotes now, overshadowed by the atomic bombings and the end of the war. They deserve better. They deserve to be remembered as part of the B-29 story, not erased by triumphalist narratives. The Wonder Bomber was wonderful and terrible at the same time. Both truths matter. Both deserve to be told.